Sego Foundation. And so we had a great discussion. A couple of things came up. Overall inspiration for India's climate leadership. The goals that they've set forward as part of the international treaties are super impressive. And so there's a lot to inspire and a lot that can help India be a global leader. We spoke about some specific things in terms of looking at sustainable agriculture and all that can be done, regenerative agriculture, working with people to create jobs in India in the field of agriculture that improves their livelihoods, creates carbon sinks, and is overall very good for India. We talked about how some of the old-fashioned concepts for working in India no longer apply, and how we have to be really on top of our monitoring and evaluation programs so that we know what we can do better, not just as individual organizations, but working together, and also so the philanthropists who support us know that they're getting a really good investment. We talked about the responsibility of corporations to step up. MR, you're well familiar with Chennai. There are a lot big IT sector in Chennai. We've enjoyed support from some of them, but it's a good place. One of our attendees specifically pointed to Chennai tech sector as a place where we really do need to be seeing some more support as that community is in need, but also tries to transform. We also talked about how tree planting drives in India are really important. They're fun, they're good for the environment, but they also need to be monitored so that we're planting native species and putting in some maintenance costs so that we're able to keep those trees alive. No point doing a tree planting drive if the trees don't live.
Great. Thank you so much. That was Anita Nagpal Schwartz with the Nature Conservancy. Now, my old friend here, Jane Burston with the Clean Air Fund. Haven't seen you in a while, but great to see you on Zoom. What were the conversations like around air pollution in your breakout session?
Well, thanks, Emma. Lovely to see you too, and thanks for inviting me. We had a really great discussion about air pollution, and initially, it's obviously the health impact of it. It's the cause of 18% of the deaths every year in India. And a number of people on the call have had personal experience of that, especially living in cities, how it comes from vehicles. But also experienced recently of how, given COVID, pollution can genuinely be reduced overnight. So the inspiration that has given to people about how quickly it can be tackled if we really put our minds to it. I think the second of 3 points that we talked about was the crossover with climate change, given the topic of this conference. And both how, because the sources of air pollution and climate change are often the same, things like vehicles or burning fossil fuels. So can the solutions be? And had a rich discussion about solar, both about solar as a solution to a different source of energy as a solution to reducing fossil fuels. But also, interestingly, the circularity of it, because if air pollution stays bad and India invests significantly in solar as it is doing, I think many people aren't aware that pollution actually reduces the output that you get from solar panels. And somebody raised a very interesting point about how renewable energy like solar is off the grid. So in a climate emergency with many more extreme weather events, it's much more resilient for communities than other sources of fuel that rely on the grid. And then finally, we talked about the economic impact of air pollution on the back of a report that the Confederation of Indian Industry and Dalberg Advisors released this morning, showing that there's a staggering $95 billion a year cost to business of air pollution, which is 3% of India's GDP. So a huge cost there because of the health impacts to businesses. And I would highly recommend that people read that very, very inspiring report.
Great. Thank you, Jane. And now finally to Hisham Mundol. Hisham, how was your session?
Thanks, Emma. No, it was a wonderful session. It was on business and the role of business. And I think there were 2 or 3 main takeouts for me. There is progress happening And it is encouraging on moving from businesses thinking about sustainability as a matter of compliance or sustainability as a matter of compassion, and thinking of sustainability instead as a driver of superior business performance. And as more and more businesses get to that place, that becomes self-fulfilling, right? Because more business performance means more profits, means more investments, which means more sustainability. So that's great. An interesting analogy was brought out saying it's quite likely that one of the things that the business world needs is community building of like-minded organizations who might otherwise be competing in the marketplace, but on sustainability, they're all on the same journey at the same place. So places where they can learn and be inspired by each other. That was one part of the conversation. Another part, we spent a lot of time talking about technology and what it would take to catalyze climate technology much more. And we looked at the analogy of fintech and how that had exploded, quite frankly, in India, and how the conditions were right in terms of the tech infrastructure and talent and the entrepreneurial backbone. And we also spoke about the potential on AI, and that was we left it as a bit of unfinished business, because there is a huge role of AI on, for example, deciphering the formula for climate smart agriculture. And so to all the Indiaspora tech entrepreneurs, there's a need for your hearts and your brains. I'll pass it back to you now.
Thank you so much. Again, we heard from Anita Schwartz with the Nature Conservancy, Jane Burston with the Clean Air Fund, and Hisham Mundol with Environmental Defense Fund. And now I want to invite the moderator for this panel moving forward is Shloka Nath. Shloka is the acting director with the India Climate Collaborative. And so I'm going to let the four of you have your discussion on climate philanthropy, and we'll see you back at the end of your session. Over to you, Shloka.
Thanks so much, MR. I can see already this is another success, much like last year, of course. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the second session of Indiaspora's Climate Summit, India Tomorrow, Perspectives from Climate Philanthropy. Thank you to all of the wonderful speakers before this panel for setting such an engaging tone for this evening. And of course, thank you to all of you, our audience members, for being here with us today. For those of you that may not know the India Climate Collaborative, or the ICC as we like to call ourselves, it's actually a first of its kind, India-led, India-focused collective of business and philanthropy that works to accelerate climate action in the country. And we really aim to represent a diversity of voices in the climate ecosystem. We work across sectors to implement scalable solutions, and we strive to increase funding to climate solutions in India. So philanthropic capital, as we all know, is limited. Philanthropic spending on climate, especially in a country like India, which prioritizes developmental needs like healthcare and education, is very, very small. The climate crisis, on the other hand, is massive. It's operating at a scale that was difficult to comprehend before the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet, philanthropy is one of our key weapons in the fight against a warming world. And we have spent over a year since the official launch of the ICC in building collaboration amongst India's philanthropic sector. We've really worked to increase philanthropic engagement with the need for climate action. And our focus has been on growing India's domestic philanthropies to become champions for the climate cause. Yet the ICC itself would be incomplete without the unwavering support of international philanthropies across the world. Many of their India programs chaired by diaspora, just like yourself, committed to furthering the development of their country, even from miles away. So it's a pleasure for me to be able to introduce you to our wonderful panel for this evening, all of whom have been close advisors and supporters of the ICC and have been instrumental in helping build India's climate movement through funding, through capacity building, and of course, through their tremendous vision and grit. I know with them already, so I'm not going to do an extensive introduction, but just to sort of recap, Hisham Mundol is the chief advisor to the newly formed India branch of the Environmental Defense Fund, one of the world's leading environmental organizations that uses science, advocacy, economics, and partnerships to bring about impactful solutions and lasting change. Jane Burston is the executive director and founder of the Clean Air Fund, a global philanthropic initiative to tackle air pollution with a special focus on the Indian region. Anita Nagpal-Schwartz heads the Nature Conservancy's philanthropic efforts for India and the US and the UK. TNC, of course, is a global nonprofit dedicated to conserving the planet's natural resources. Our last panelist, Siddharthan Balasubramaniam, Senior Advisor of Strategy at ClimateWorks Foundation, unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight due to a personal emergency, but Sid has been an incredible source of support for the Indian climate movement, and we will miss him tonight. So with that, I'm going to pass our mic on to our panelists for the evening. And Anita, I'm actually going to open up with you. My first question for you is, why is philanthropic capital so well suited to tackling the climate crisis? And why is it especially relevant for India?
Shloka, thank you. Do I have about 5 minutes on this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's so nice to see you on camera today. As you know, our organizations have worked together, but you and I have not personally connected. So it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for asking a great question. And yes, philanthropic capital is essential to carrying out climate goals in India, to meeting our climate goals in India. Organizations like the Nature Conservancy have set carbon reduction goals. In our case, we have a goal of reducing carbon by 3 gigatons per year through sequestration and reduced emissions. Over 10 years, that's equivalent to removing 650 million cars from the road. So it's going to require, it's important, and it's going to require philanthropic support. And it is actually essential that we succeed. As we know, a climate crisis is a people crisis too. We're looking at fundamental issues of survival, clean air, access to water, and food demands. We know that food demands are going to increase in India by 50% by 2030. Energy demands expected to go up by 175%, and water demands expected to go up by 50%. These are all related to climate. So let's look at how philanthropy is making a difference. Just last week, we got a large grant. We were so thankful. It's a corporate grant that's going to allow us to work on a water project, Water for Nature and People near Pune, India. We're now going to launch a project for the Gode River restoration. And there are about 4.5 million people who rely on that river as their main water source. So a grant that can impact 4.5 million people is a huge return on investment at any size. On food security, with philanthropic investments from Tata Trust, Shloka, where I know you've had a good experience, we're looking at fundamentally addressing agricultural practices in Punjab and Haryana and making those practices far more sustainable. I know Jane knows quite a bit about this as well, but we're working to phase out the crop residue burning there that's taking place and sending, impacting the farmers' health there, but also sending really bad air to Delhi in the wintertime. And we're working there with 250,000 farmers. And with the sustainable practices that we're putting in place, their incomes can also go up. So huge return on investment. Choosing renewable energy, a great way to impact India's air quality and reduce climate emissions. We've worked on a tool called SiteRight. And our work on that has been supported through private philanthropy, foundation funding. And this tool helps planners figure out where they can put in place large wind and solar projects without disrupting forests or tribal communities. This allows business to go ahead. Clean, green business in India creates jobs, helps address the climate crisis. And my last example, and probably our best one, with philanthropic funding, we provided a set of recommendations to the Indian government at their request. They were looking for information on how to allocate tax dollars to support climate goals. So now substantial funds are going to be sent to states that have extensive green cover. And the amount sent is going to be based on their green cover. This motivates states to keep their forests and to create new ones. And it helps India meet its climate commitments. To give you an example of return on investment, we got this win when we were a $6 million program overall, the Nature Conservancy in India, $6 million program, the amount of return on investment is $66 billion. That's billion US dollars going to states with green cover. This is the world's largest fiscal transfer based on green cover and is an enormous win. And it will shape the way India proceeds going forward, a great way to help meet climate goals. All of this work happens through private philanthropy. And so I think, organizations like the Nature Conservancy, there are many others out there doing great work, can make a case that the philanthropy helps at every level. Thank you so much for letting me share that. And thank you to all the partners out there in India who make our work possible. We don't do this work alone.
Thank you, Anita. It's lovely to finally connect with you as well. Thank you for bringing home such a crucial point. It's often not about the amount of funding, but the strategic imperative behind that funding, because what philanthropic capital can be and what no other form of capital can be is actually incredibly catalytic. So thank you for that. I think your examples were fantastic, and I think they really brought home that point. Moving to Hisham now. Hisham, it's great to see you here again. How can philanthropy support India's transition to a net zero economy? And how can philanthropy play a really key role in the non-mitigation elements of the climate crisis? And so when I say non-mitigation, I mean adaptation, just transitions, things that are really not accounted for in this race to net zero.
Sure, thank you, and lovely to see you as well. And then thank you, Indiaspora, both the team as well as the members of the diaspora for caring about the issue and the country. So, Satya at the start of today's session spoke about net zero and his perspective, and I wanted to share a slightly nuanced view on this as well. There is a lot of talk around net zero, and there's a difference between achieving net zero, getting close to net zero, and making public commitments about net zero. And I think it's important to just kind of figure out what is the value or otherwise of a net zero commitment. A net zero commitment is fantastic as a battle cry. It's fantastic as a set of organizing principles that guides policy, resourcing, etc. But it is far more critical to think about the building blocks that would go into a net zero achievement and the milestones around it, rather than say net zero by X, Y, Z, and then we'll see you in 2040 or 2050. What are these kind of building blocks? It could be of a wide range of things. We could be thinking about how do we fundamentally reduce the cost of transition for an industrial plant? How do we get climate smart agriculture, the climate smart bit of agriculture to start kicking in? How do we bring in new science like green hydrogen, for example? How do we catalyze market forces of the kind that Anita spoke about a moment ago? Milestones. Let's take the electric vehicle example, and if you look at it, we've made this national pledge that all cars in India are going to be, only electric cars sold by X date. Along the way, though, we need to be thinking about the share of electric vehicles to total sales. We need to be thinking about the number of states with electric vehicle incentives. We need to think about the volume of charging infrastructure. Those are the kind of things that are far more likely to get you to actual net zero than the commitment per se. I'm not dissing the commitment. I'm saying think about the building blocks and the organizing principles. What would the role of philanthropy be? So personally, I believe that philanthropic money is precious and needs to go to those areas. It needs to be used as funding what is unfundable, the tougher areas out there. What are these tougher areas? These are the ones which tend to be politically challenging or technically complicated or a mix of both. In that context, therefore, think about where in the broad spectrum of net zero emissions are really the hardest issues. There are hard to abate industries like cement and steel. Very little progress is being made on them. There are really hard questions that we are still not addressing. 500,000 jobs come from coal in India. Coal is not going to go away unless we think about what happens to 500,000 people in 3 states with 41 Lok Sabha MPs. and presumably multiplied by 5 number of family members. That's a real constituency that we have to think about. There are tough scientific questions which need philanthropic money. In the breakout group that we had, we were talking about how artificial intelligence and machine learning need to come into play to resolve or make progress on climate smart agriculture. There's also the opportunity for philanthropy to support what I call Leapfrog Technologies. As a country, we jump from no phones right over landlines into mobile, no bank branches, no banking. We went straight to mobile banking. Those are the kinds of technologies which will require the risk capital and the patient capital that only philanthropy can bring in. Just on the mitigation and adaptation point, India is interesting because we're so early on in our growth journey that adaptation and mitigation kind of tend to become intertwined. Half the buildings that we need are not yet built. If we have to meet our economic growth objectives, we're going to have to double steel and cement manufacture. So I wouldn't be so fussed about are we slotting it in adaptation or mitigation. But the point I'd make is come back to saying where can philanthropic money either be catalytic or leveraged. Catalytic in terms of creating new markets, like, for example, the LED bulb phenomenon that has exploded in India, or leveraging government spending. There's a lot of well-intentioned government spending that needs a little bit of support and guidance that can deliver disproportionately good results. A pause here.
Thanks, Hisham. I thought that was actually really well said, as always. And I love how you spoke about how philanthropy could support that transition, but you really broke down an incredibly complex issue into the building blocks of any big target, right? And those organizing principles, setting those shorter term milestones. And I got that you aren't dissing the commitment. Thank you for clarifying that as well. I think we do need to find a commitment, though, that walks the tightrope between supporting innovation and growth and actually being achievable. And I think your examples were really well sort of taken in that. And I'm sure we'll come back to this. But I'm going to move on to Jane now, because she also has an incredibly sort of interesting area of work, and one that is so relevant to what we're dealing with in India right now. If you can talk to us a little bit, Jane, about your experience at the Clean Air Fund, and in your opinion, how can learning from the air pollution sector really inform efforts to expedite funding to an engagement with other sectors within climate action in India?
Thanks, Shloka. Great to be part of this panel, and great question. I mean, I actually don't see action on air pollution and action on climate as two different things. I think that they're done well can be exactly the same thing. And it's actually one of the reasons why many funders that we see are coming to air pollution, or from air pollution are coming to climate, is the opportunity for wins on both health and reduction of greenhouse gases. I think what we've seen is that for some segments of the population, lots of segments of the population really care about climate change, but it doesn't affect their decision making on a day-to-day basis. Even though they do genuinely have this concern, they don't tend to translate it into their everyday lives. Whereas with air pollution, because it impacts them and their families every day, it's something that seems a lot less remote, a lot more urgent, local and tangible often than the impacts of climate change. So there's huge different segments of the population who would understand broadly and be motivated to do something about air pollution that might not if we were talking solely in climate change terms. One of the interesting things that we saw at the beginning of the COVID pandemic is we funded a survey across many different countries globally about how much do people care about air pollution, and where does it rank in their list of environmental concerns, where does it rank in their list of health concerns. And we were absolutely blown away that in India, I mean, obviously 94% of people think that air pollution could be improved in their local area. But what blew us away was that 86% of people said that they were concerned about air pollution as a health concern. And it was exactly the same percentage who were concerned about infectious disease. And this was, after the first couple of months of the pandemic, in a lot of other countries, we saw infectious disease coming a high first and air pollution a second. But the fact that they're on a par in India does speak volumes. I think the fact that there are wins available here on health is really heightened by what we've learned about the links between air quality and the respiratory diseases that air pollution causes, and COVID itself. People are even more aware than they were before of people that are vulnerable because of respiratory diseases that have either been caused by air pollution or are being exacerbated by air pollution. And so there's even more sensitivity to the topic, and not least because we've also at the same time in many areas with lockdown seen air pollution come right down. So people can see that it is a problem that can be tackled. I think one of the things that I find incredibly motivating for working on this is the benefit to children's health. For every single microgram that we can reduce, it does have a tangible impact on children's health and children's prospects and prosperity later in life. I'll come on to the kind of economic benefits to business in a minute, but I was struck recently reading a study that some Israeli economists have done, where they looked at just the short-term impact of air pollution on children on the day that they were taking their exams. And correcting for all of the confounding factors, they found that children who were in schools that couldn't afford air purifiers on high air pollution days scored much worse in their exams than either children in schools that had air purifiers or children that took their exams on lower pollution days. And they calculated the impact that would have on their future earnings. And it was really significant, something like $30 a month for the rest of their lives lost because of their lower high school exam score. And that's just exposure on one single day, the kind of loss of concentration that you get when you're being poisoned by the air. So there's a huge equity issue here for the kids that are going to schools that can't afford the purifiers, and whose mothers have been exposed whilst pregnant. And then finally, I think one of the things that we're learning is that even though the health impacts are massive, and even though the co-benefits to climate change of tackling air pollution are incredibly significant, often pollution-related legislation or action kind of stops when it comes to tackling the Treasury or the Finance Ministry. And in terms of getting businesses involved, sometimes it's hard to push the private sector to voluntary action. So one of the things that we've really focused on funding is evidence of the economic benefit of tackling air pollution. And this report from Dalberg out this morning is an absolutely phenomenal example of that. I think India is leading in the world in this kind of analysis. 3% of GDP is a huge number. And I think as the government thinks about building back better, it will be very interesting evidence to take into account for how tackling air pollution can really support businesses, because I think often the narrative is economic development, an inevitable consequence of that is the pollution that we see. And actually for many industries, the exact opposite is true when we're looking at staff productivity and the impact on particular sectors like tourism. So I think in conclusion, the win-win-wins for health and climate and the economy is one of the main things that we've learned. And building on the points of the other two speakers, the opportunity for collaboration, not just across the NGO sector, but also with the health sector and with the private sector too, is huge.
Thanks, Jane. I think the report you've launched today is a seminal piece of work and is going to be an important one that's going to be referred to for a very, very long time to come. I think it just goes to the heart of the issue, which you've pointed out, of course, is the structural inequality behind climate change. And so if there was ever a sort of motive of move in terms of, building out solutions and interventions. It's just that it's going to speak to the heart of everything that we care about within the development sector as a whole, if we don't start dealing with climate change. Thank you for that, and congratulations on the report. I'm very excited to sort of see what comes from it. My next question actually is for all three of you. And I'm going to come back to you, Anita. I think it's a question that's common for all of you, but I'd love to hear from you first, Anita. What is TNC's plans and strategies to accelerate climate action in India in the near future? And I think if you could also elaborate a bit on what advice you might give new funders looking to invest in climate action in India. And Jane and Hisham, I'm going to come to you next. Same question for you. What are your organization's plans and strategies to focus on climate action in India in the near future? And what would be your advice to new funders? So we'll start with you, Anita.
Thank you, Shloka. It's a great question. And I've already touched some on our work, the Nature Conservancy's work on energy and policy, work that benefits people, work on water. And I want to say that some of our new projects benefit our furry friends. As India's climate changes, India's wildlife struggles. And so to help, we've got, there are a number of people working on tigers and elephants, and we've got our eye on the gorgeous Himalayan brown bear. There are about 500 of these bears left. And when their habitat changes, their behavior changes. And so they're coming closer to communities in Ladakh. And what we're looking to do is to collaborate with communities there to prevent some of the human and wildlife conflicts. We're training bear guardians, which to me sounds like a great job title, depending on the day. And with these bear guardians, they'll proactively look for ways for peaceful coexistence, whether that's fencing in corrals or barns to keep the bears away from the livestock, or looking at waste management measures so that the waste does not attract the bears. There's a lot that we can do. And these paid guardians can have improved livelihoods. We'll be addressing the first immediate problem, which is this human-bear conflict, while we then turn our attention to larger landscape restoration plans that address climate change. And to funders looking to invest in India, I say, please do. I think that the Nature Conservancy and others can make the case that we're getting the return in India, that India is excited to do this work. And within that setting, we're able to do a lot, like that large ecological fiscal transfer that I referred to earlier of $66 billion. India is mission critical for the Nature Conservancy and for other NGOs. It's third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions and holds 8% of the world's biodiversity in a single country. We must succeed overall for planetary health. And somebody said earlier today that we have half of our hearts in India. That is certainly true, very true. And when we look at the job that India has done protecting its biodiversity, they've done very well. This is an incredible legacy to protect. So if you're looking at issues of legacy in India, you gotta fund the nature. And then, Shloka, I wanna echo one of the thoughts that you said, which is that conservation and environment really need to be elevated as a philanthropic priority, similar to health and education. In some ways, environment is a health cause. In many ways, it's a health cause. These are issues of human lives: clean water, clean air, food security. We can't survive otherwise. So really, these issues do need to come up for funders in a much larger way. And so thank you for that. I hope people will consider it.
Thanks, Anita. Hisham, I'm gonna pass it down to you. But thank you, Anita. That was very eloquently said.
Sure. Thanks.
I want the bear job, by the way. Just saying.
You're in queue for that one. That's a very cool looking sounding job. And thanks, Anita, and thanks, Shloka. So EDF has been active in India for close to 10 years. We've not exactly maintained a high profile, but so that you might not have heard too much about this, but we support Mahindra and Mahindra's net zero commitment, for example. In the days when we used to travel on Indigo Airlines, you had an option of buying a carbon offset. That was informed by us. We're doing work on climate smart agriculture in Bihar, and it's extending to Maharashtra, where we're trying, we're using a combination of digital platforms and micro-entrepreneurial models to help farmers, increase output, but also increase incomes and have more climate sustainable agriculture practices. We're helping build out in India air quality center of excellence, because one big lever of change in India is going to be made in India solutions for in Indian problems. Our vision is we see an India with a pathway to a shared, healthy, low carbon prosperity. And our ambition is to be a progressive partner to the country that combines fit for purpose technology, understands the market forces, really embeds in the political economy of the country, and works across a broad sector of stakeholders, businesses, corporates, communities. Everyone that matters is who we work with. We're setting up an India entity, and we're attempting to make it, have it as a made in India entity, solutions for Indians by Indians. And I'll be honest and say we're looking for supporters from the diaspora, so we'll be happy to carry on this conversation. On advice to funders, this isn't so much about EDF, but in general, I have two things in my mind. One is just stay focused. Focus on any one or a limited set of areas that you're passionate about and because of the potential it holds. The second is think of those ideas that can scale up. India can only move forward if we have ideas that have a runway to scale. Otherwise, we're just playing on the sidelines. In terms of supporting partners, look for partners that you're comfortable with at an individual level, but who also understand both the science and the politics of working in India and getting change done. And those are equally important. Thank you.
Thanks, Hisham. I love that. A really resounding set of ideas and a great call to action. And I think under your leadership, like EDF in India is going to do amazing things. And we're all here to support everyone on this panel. So you have a good team behind you as well. I'm still trying to figure out what that map behind you is off or from. I think it's been a year, but I haven't been able to place it yet. Jane, so you can let us know at some point. Jane, over to you. You have the final word. I wanted to hear from you about some of the plans that CAF has in store, in the near future, and of course, advice for new funders who are looking to invest in this space.
Absolutely. So as a philanthropic organisation dedicated to clean air, we are granting to a number of different organisations in India. We don't do the delivery on the ground ourselves, we make grants. And we make a huge variety of grants across a lot of different types of topic on supporting organisations to measure air pollution, so the data, and making sure that the campaigning groups or local authorities have access to the data that they need to do their work, looking at the health impacts, working with business, and supporting pollution control boards, city governments, and the national government to really measure what they're looking to measure and develop policies on it. And our focus is in cities like New Delhi, Lucknow, Agra, really working at all tiers of government with the city, the state pollution control board, and the national government. And I think, one of the things that we have done, which I've found quite striking, is looking at the amount of philanthropic funding that's being spent on air pollution globally. For the last couple of years, we've done a report called State of Global Air Quality Funding, which does what it says on the tin. And there's a really very small amount of funding going to reducing air pollution in India. Last year it was, for 2019, which we reported last year, it was 13.8 million. And we know that the study doesn't necessarily capture all of the funding, and it obviously doesn't capture voluntary work because that isn't paid for, but that's tiny in comparison to the scale of the challenge. So I would say if you're thinking about investing on air quality, literally every dollar does make a difference. There's loads of really good organizations in India that are struggling for funding, and on a range of topics. Data, if you're a technical person, health impacts, if you want to work on research and the health side of things, local groups and community action. So whatever your interest, there is a group that wants to work on air quality within that. But the advice that I would give, I think two things. One, Hisham already said this in his earlier comments, but look for leverage. One of the reasons that we've funded the Confederation of Indian Industry to set up this private sector CEO forum on air pollution is because there is a huge amount of potential, both in the CSR donation from Indian businesses, the 2% CSR donation, but also the action that they could voluntarily take. That would cost a huge amount were we to invest in it, and we would never have the funding to do that. But by bringing the CEOs together through the Confederation of Indian Industry, it really helps them kind of champion the cause, boost one another's incentive to do something through healthy competition, and share best practice for their own industry. So leverage for me is pretty key. I think the second piece of advice is there's a lot of ambition in India. The government has a very strong national clean air plan with very ambitious targets. There's lots of groups that really want change to happen. And so, there's a huge opportunity to invest in those organizations that are putting their shoulder behind those targets and really attempting to achieve them, rather than the kind of challenge anti everything stuff that I think is sometimes appears to fund. So I would say, leverage and shoulder behind the targets.
Thanks, Jane. I think you really nicely tied in to some of what Hisham and Anita were referring to earlier as well, that we need a lot more ground level action. I think your point on AQ is well taken. There's a lot that we can do, which we haven't managed to do yet. A good example is, of course, the Environmental Pollution Prevention and Control Authority in India has been dissolved. The EPCA, the Commission for Air Quality Management, has also lapsed. So we don't really have a governing body for air quality in the country. And, we're looking at targets like net zero, and yet there are, of course, these sort of mechanisms at the central level that need to be built in, and at the state level that don't really exist. And so again, the work that you're doing is absolutely fantastic, but we do need to sort of work on really reforming a number of these sectors and making sure we ignite those crucial sectoral transitions and fill in those ecosystem gaps. So the work that all of you are doing is so crucial to putting India on that path to sustainable development, and I really thank you for that. I just want to wrap up here. I think that's all the time we'll have for tonight. So thank you to the organizers of Indiaspora for inviting us, for creating this platform to explore India's climate story. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for this evening, and as I said, for the work that you're all doing in this space, and for sharing your insights with us tonight. And thank you, of course, to our audience for taking the time out to be with us here today. I think I'll just wrap up on this one note, which is climate change is not an isolated phenomenon. It impacts every single aspect of India's development, from healthcare to gender equity to urban planning. We need to bring a climate lens into all the work that we do, into all the funding we give or receive, and into our very perception of what the future holds for us. And building resilience is pivotal to securing the needs and rights of future generations. And that responsibility really just lies with us. It's in our hands. So we can use climate action to support India's development, to grow India's nascent green economy, to protect India's most vulnerable populations. And it's going to take all of us, all, whether you're in the country or outside of it, to come together and invest in the future of this nation. So thank you once again. I hope you've had a lovely day or night, as may be the case, and do take care of yourselves. Thank you so much, and over to you, MR.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shloka. That was a great way you articulated the summary. Once again, I want to thank Jane Hisham, Anita, and yourself for taking the time. And for those of you, I know a couple of you are in India, please stay safe. Our prayers with you. And I know the country's going through some really tough times. So stay safe and let's continue the work on climate change as well as all of you put it. Thank you so much. And now we move on to our final keynote of the day. It's my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Arjun Devecha. Arjun is a founder circle member at Indiaspora, but he also really created the Divecha Center for Climate Change at the Indian Institute of Science in Bengaluru. So I want to welcome my good friend Arjun to make some remarks on what the center is doing and what his thoughts are on the climate change challenges in India. Welcome, Arjun.
Sure. Thanks very much, Amar. I thought I'd spend a few minutes just telling you about the Divecha Center and about how, what is the mission and what do we actually do. Essentially, as Amar mentioned, it is based at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. And it was founded about 10 or 12 years ago as a partnership between myself and my colleague, Jeremy Grantham, who is quite well known as in the environmental movement, who runs something called the Grantham Foundation for the Protection of the Environment. And essentially, we set up the center in cooperation with the Indian Institute of Science. So it is a department which kind of sits within the environmental studies, environmental sciences department in Bangalore. The mission, as I see it, is kind of a threefold mission. First of all, there's kind of research work that we do. Secondly, there's outreach and education. And thirdly, there's kind of relations with the government itself. So let me talk briefly about each of these three and kind of what are some of the things that we've done in each of these three areas. First, on the research front, as you can imagine, it's primarily a research institution. And so doing research, fundamental research into climate change. And as I see it, India has two very large issues having to do with climate change, apart from everything else. One is the impact of the monsoons. Obviously, with climate change, the monsoons get affected, and so therefore there's a huge impact of that. And two is glacial melting. And again, pretty much all of North India's water comes from the Himalayas, and so to the extent that you have a problem with glacial melting, there's an issue with that. So we've done a lot of research in a lot of subjects, but these two are kind of specific areas of focus, in addition to black carbon and what are the impacts on things like that. In addition to doing research kind of on our own, we also have a lot of cooperation with the Grantham Institutes in England, which are located at the Imperial College in London and also at the London School of Economics. And so there's a lot of cooperation back and forth where there's projects which are done jointly and things like that. And just to give you an example of a small thing that we did, which really, I think, made a small but important difference. One of the professors at the Divecha Center is Professor Kulkarni, who is really one of the world's leading glaciologists. And he wrote a paper about 5 years ago about glacial melting, about essentially these lakes that get formed when glaciers melt, because you have an ice plug at the end of the glacier, and when that ice plug melts, you could theoretically have a huge amount of water that that floods. And we saw that very recently, as I'm sure most of you are familiar. Anyway, so he wrote a paper about this, about the South Lona Glacier in Sikkim, and estimated the amount of water that was backed up. And as he said, described to me that within a week, he got a call from the chief minister of Sikkim saying kind of, hey, what can we do about this? And so the center then put together a small project to figure out how can we mitigate this issue, and came up with a very, very simple solution, which is to create a very large plastic tube which siphons the water out. And so for the last 5 years, we've been siphoning the water out of that lake. So it's a small, small win in having an impact, hopefully, on human beings. So that's kind of on the research front. The second place that we do work is on the outreach. And we do a lot of education of the community. We have kind of an annual climate change quiz, which is attended by thousands of students all over India. We, in addition, have a lot of public seminars and classes and things like that. But most importantly, as I see it, what the center has been able to do is to essentially provide funding for over 20 graduate students in climate research. And so so we have a number of professors and a number of graduate students who are now getting PhDs in climate science. And so we think that's very, very important. The third area, and in my opinion, perhaps the most important, and this is one which, which is not obvious when you first think about it, but part of the reason to have a center at the Indian Institute of Science was essentially that at the end of the day, if you can't affect government policy, that is the most important thing that you can do. Because at the end of the day, to really make a difference to climate change, you have to affect government policy. And by being located at one of the premier research institutes, in the country, we have that access to the government. And so, for example, just about a month or two before the Paris Accords, Prime Minister Modi, in fact, invited the director of our center to spend a day with him in Delhi, kind of explaining to him, well, what do we see? And so we like to think we had some influence on India's, signing the Paris Accords and, educating things like that. And that has continued ever since then. In fact, with the new climate COP conference coming up later on this year, we are already in touch with the government in helping them kind of formulate India's policies towards that. So we like to think that, we serve all these three kind of areas: doing research, fundamental research on climate, outreach to the community to try and educate, and then thirdly, to kind of hopefully influence government policy. So that's essentially what we do, MR.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Arjun. This is good. I think today what we've talked about are three things, right? One, we wanted to inspire people. I think that was one of the things today with the Earth Day coming up. Second was to talk about collaboration between organizations. And the final thing is to look for individual action, like what you've taken and many others are taking in this space. So I think what at Indiaspora we've tried to do is to show our viewers all three elements. Hopefully people will take action by being inspired by folks like Rob Swan, people like Satya Tripathi and others, and Dr. Kamal Bawa are propagating institutions, and folks like you are funding institutions. And then, of course, we heard the eminent panel talk about how they're cooperating with the India Climate Cooperative, right, to bring about change. So I think all of us play a key part in this ecosystem. So do you have any words for people who are looking to invest in India around the climate problem today, Arjun? Because you're a money manager at the end of the day. So where would you allocate? If I had $100 to invest in India, where would I put that in the climate field?
Well, from an investing point of view, I would say that one of the things which has been most heartening really over the last few years especially is the shift within the investment landscape towards what is called ESG investing. And within ESG investing, I would say that most of the focus has been on climate change. And so increasingly companies are being forced by the marketplace to adopt policies that are, that are climate friendly. And we see that every single day now. We see more and more, like when we go to try and pitch to get new business from, from potential clients, the first question that they ask us typically is show us what is your ESG policy, what is your policy on investing in companies, from a climate change point of view. So I think that is making a profound difference in the corporate world. That basically you can no longer kind of be, kind of wave that off and saying, well, we focus on profits and, climate comes second. That's no longer the case. And this is true not just in India, this is true everywhere in the world. Believe it or not, there are companies in Russia which are involved with mining who are very, very, very much focused now because of this on cleaning up the environment, on cleaning up the air, on cleaning up things within, within their sphere. Even companies, located in deep Siberia, where there's really no population centers and things like that. But at the end of the day, they are now forced by market forces to, so I'm a big believer that, that market forces can be an extremely good good impact on climate change.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Arjun, for joining us. And
thank you.
Keep up the great work at your center and keep us updated as well. All right.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, Amar. Bye.
Thank you. Next up, I think we have our final inspiring moment of this summit. So we will have our friend Ricky Cage. Is Ricky here?
Yes, I am. I'm just turning on my video.
Great, no problem. Come on. I want to see your picture, Ricky, and ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah, my video is on actually. I think, yeah. Now I'm on screen. Yeah,
Great.
There I am.
Good evening to you, Ricky. It looks like you're sitting in your studio in Bengaluru.
Yes, I am. This is my writing room. This is where I do all my composing.
Do you have your bed somewhere there as well, close by?
I've got a sofa which is large enough to be a bed, which usually becomes my bed.
Fantastic. Great to have you. So tell me, before we play some inspirational music, video, and stuff like that from you, you're a Grammy Award winner. You've focused and dedicated your life to, taking action on climate change. You're such an inspiring force in the music world. What are you planning to do on Earth Day that's coming up? I know you guys are shut down, locked down. The country's going through a huge crisis. What do you plan to do on Earth Day in a couple of days?
So I've got a live performance with the Earth Day Network, which is happening on April 22nd. So that's going to be a pretty cool performance because sharing the stage is going to be Pope Francis, and we're going to have Secretary John Kerry and a bunch of other musicians. So that's going to be a really, really cool concert to be a part of.
And how do people know about that concert? Where do they go? Can you give us?
So they could just go to earthdaynetwork.org, and it's going to be live streamed over there.
Yeah, and we'll post that on our chat as well. So that's happening on Earth Day, and you're going to be performing there. So
correct.
That's phenomenal. So in terms of where do you see India? You've heard this whole session for 2 hours this morning. You've seen, like I said, people inspiring us, people taking action. Where do you see India moving ahead with taking action on climate change from your vantage point?
So, I agreed with what everybody said. And, I'm not a person who actually does tremendous amount of work on ground. I'm more of a person who communicates messages and understands problems and communicates these issues. But one thing that I do understand about India in my own naive way is that, India is a very complicated country, and, there are problems which are considered to be survival problems, and there are problems which are considered to be thriving problems. And unfortunately, when it comes to climate change, it's always thought about as a thriving problem and not a survival problem in India. And that is what we're lacking in our communication, that we need to showcase to everyone that this is a survival problem, because people feel that there are more immediate problems which are survival problems, and unless we fix those problems, we cannot get to the thriving problem. So in my own naive way, this is what I feel, that that the communication needs to be stronger in terms of climate change.
And what inspired you to kind of dedicate your journey to climate change, having been a musician, a Grammy Award winner, making commercial music and all that stuff? When did you decide to do that, and what inspired you?
So when I started off my musical career about 20 years ago, I was doing a whole lot of commercials, and I was quite successful doing that. I did, in a span of about 13 or 14 years, I did more than 3,500 commercials for pretty much every brand you can imagine and their competitor. So, and in every part of the world. And it sort of struck me after 13, 14 years of doing this, that these big brands have understood the power of music, so much so that they're ready to spend so much of money on me to create a piece of music for them to sell a product. And not only that, they're ready to spend a couple of $1 million to actually air this music to sell their product. So that is when I realized that when these big brands have understood the power of music, it's high time that I myself as a musician need to understand this power. And that is when I decided that I'm going to stop all forms of commercial music or Bollywood music or anything like that. And I'm only going to create music on social impact. And since I feel very strongly about the environment, and I consider myself to be a very strong environmentalist. So automatically, whenever I make music, it always veers towards being about the environment.
Fantastic. And you have a YouTube channel, so people can check out all your videos there. Plus, you also do live concerts. So set up the song we're going to play now for us.
So this song actually, I have to say, was completely inspired by Mr. Satya Tripathi. So he's been a mentor to me and been a very close friend of mine for a long time. And he told me when I performed at the World Environment Day in New Delhi, this was in 2018, for the government of India. So at that time, he he approached me and he told me about this zero budget natural farming. That is a natural farming technique that is being followed in Andhra Pradesh, especially in Araku Valley, where currently there are 600. He must have explained all about it. It's a huge, huge movement. And so I visited Araku Valley, visited Guntur, visited parts of Andhra Pradesh, and I was so inspired by these amazing farmers, especially the tribal farmers, who they themselves are musicians and they've got these songs that have been passed down from generations. So I actually stayed there for a much longer time, thoroughly inspired by them, by their lifestyles, by how much they feel about sustainability. And then I created this song in collaboration with them. So this is basically the song that you're going to hear, me in collaboration with the tribal farmers of the natural farming technique.
Fantastic. So we'll see you after the song.
Hello everyone, Namaste from India. I'm Ricky Cage and it is a huge honor for me to perform for you today at the Indiaspora Climate Summit. A big shout out to M.R. Rangaswamy and his wonderful dedicated team at Indiaspora. Our song is a dedication to the farmers of India, especially the zero budget natural farmers of Andhra Pradesh. Now Satya Tripathi is with us today, who spearheaded this massive movement in India. Some of these tribal farmers are fantastic musicians and have songs that have been passed down for generations. So of course, I collaborated with them for this song. Also joining us are Mumfo Mukhaba from South Africa, Wari Jashri and Arun Kumar from India. Here is the One with Earth song.
Wow. Ricky, what an inspiring and amazing and uplifting song. Thank you so much for that wonderful performance, and really appreciate your support of Indiaspora as well. And just a promotion, we'll see you back again tonight for the US Climate Summit, which all of you in India can wake up a little bit early tomorrow morning to watch. And I hope you get some sleep and you join us tomorrow morning, Ricky.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity to showcase my music and my thoughts at your wonderful, wonderful event. Thank you.
So we'll see you on the second part tomorrow morning. So take it easy. And now I'd like to welcome back our Executive Director, Sanjeev Joshipura, to help me close out the first part of our Climate Summit. So Sanjeev, what did you think? You've been watching this unfold over the past 2 hours. Some of your thoughts?
Incredible event, MR. When we were putting the agenda together with our team, I know we were all very optimistic about the event. We thought it was a great lineup, some excellent speakers, but frankly, I think the event even outdid my already pretty high expectations. And I'm so gratified that so many people chose to join us from India, from other parts of the world, some from here in America as well. A lot of substantive panels, a lot of substantive, concrete, actionable advice given by a lot of our panelists who I think framed complex issues in a way that was so inspiring.
No, that's terrific. But I want to give a special shout out to Monsie Patel. Hopefully we can embarrass her and bring her on screen. Can we spotlight Monsie, please? Because she was the person who pulled it off, this whole incredible event. Monsie, thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you. It was a team effort. So I feel like I have to give a nod to the rest of the team as well, who also helped with so much for this event.
Thank you, Monsie. And I think, Sanjeev, like you said, the thing that amazed me as we pulled this whole program together was the number of diaspora members who are in different facets of this climate ecosystem, right? Whether it's a UN Assistant Secretary General, to people running NGOs, to people funding centers for sustainability, to so many things that are very positive changes within our world. It is great to see the diaspora so involved, right?
That's exactly right, Amar. And we are learning as we go. I mean, as we become the conveners of the global diaspora leaders in different fields, whether it's climate like you saw today, whether it's philanthropy, politics, and government, business. I mean, we are always so pleasantly surprised by the number of Indian diaspora leaders who are so involved at the highest levels of their professions and are using their influence and their positions to really advance the social agenda for the social good. That's what is most inspiring.
And it's also heartening to see our friends from the UK, people like Rob Swan and Jane Burston, so involved and dedicated to helping India as well. So I think the goodwill and stuff for helping India is far greater than the country itself. And one thing that stays with me that Rohini Nilakani eloquently put it was, what India does and where India goes is where the world is going to go as well. So if India cannot tackle COVID and cannot tackle climate change, it's going to not just be an Indian problem, it's a global issue, right?
Absolutely, exactly right. Couldn't agree more.
And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're closing out the India session of the Indiaspora Climate Summit. And Sanjeev, when do we start the US session for people who want to know this evening? I think it's...
the US session begins at 5:00 p.m. Pacific time here in the US, which is 8:00 p.m. Eastern, which in India, as you said, is early. It's 5:30 a.m. in India. But it's a couple of hours session. We hope that some people from India as well can catch at least a portion of it.
Fantastic. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending and thank the Indiaspora team, Monsie and team, for pulling off such a fantastic event. And hopefully this will lead to a lot of positive things to come on the climate change side. So thank you, everyone.